Hello and welcome everyone to our second to last edition of Tea Time SEO. Today we have got a new topic installed for you today. It's all about how to use APIs for SEO. And today we are joined by Laurence O'Toole, Sandy Lee, and David Krevitt. I'm SEO Joe Blogs growth marketer at Authoritas, and I'm also here joined by Carrie Shepherd, working in our marketing team. So today we have three great speakers all sharing their tips about how really you can use APIs for SEO. It's not that scary, and hopefully you will all be able to go away with something new that you can then implement. If you have any questions, please drop them in the chat, and our speakers will be able to answer them in our Q&A. And if you're enjoying what you're seeing, please give us a nice little like there and subscribe to our YouTube channel. So I'm going to pass over and the speakers will introduce themselves and then we'll go into the tips. Over to you, Laurence.
Thanks, Joe. Hi, everyone. David, Sandy, great for you to join us. Really appreciate you taking the time. And Carrie for putting all this together with Joe. I'm the CEO and founder of Authoritas. I'm a cake eater, not a baker, apparently, as we've come to see on these Tea Time SEOs. And I have two beautiful daughters who are very miffed at the fact that we're live streaming right now and they can't be gaming. And I have a lovely wife. And there's a picture of a dog next to my wife for some reason, but I assure you she is, that's a new puppy in our household during lockdown. I'm here to give you like a bit of a set the scene really from a non-technical perspective on APIs. They needn't be daunting, they needn't be scary, and you can do amazing things with them. And hopefully Sandy and David will tell you some of the amazing things you can do. Over to you, Sandy.
Technical SEO that kind of made the jump into data science. I've been doing SEO for about 10 years. I'm the group data lead at Purplex Marketing. We're in Bristol in the UK. I tend now more towards data analytics and technical SEO than anything else. And I'm hoping today to show you that APIs needn't be scary, but you can kind of get some really amazing insights for very little effort. And I'm going to pass you off to David next.
Thanks, Sandy. I am David Krevitt. I started off as a blog called Coding is for Losers. I really come at this from purely a perspective of laziness. I like working with data. I like helping marketers and specifically SEOs work with data, but I'm extremely lazy. So I don't like to do work that isn't necessary to do. So I think that's the perspective I'll bring here. I also do a lot of work with databases like Google BigQuery, so love to get into some of that stuff as well.
Great, thank you, David, and thanks everyone for joining us today. We have an international tea time. I hope everyone's brought their cup of coffee or tea. We have David, you're over in Austin, Texas. Sandy's in Bristol, the UK. Carrie's in Putney, London, and Laurence is in Twickenham, London, and I'm in Barcelona. I'm going to pass now over to the speakers who will go through all their insightful tips. Do drop them a message in the Q&A so we can answer the questions afterwards. Thank you very much. Over to you, Laurence.
Thanks, Joe. Okay, so my first message is don't be afraid of APIs. We could have probably done this as a Halloween special. Sometimes the fear of sort of APIs throws up, terminology, application programming interface. What the hell is that? I remember the first time I heard it many years ago. I probably had to get it in my head a couple of times that this was two computer systems talking to each other. But you don't need to be afraid of APIs at all. And in fact, they are so commonplace today. All good platforms, even the Authoritas platform connects to many APIs. And I was looking at the APIs that we connect to. We've got Google Analytics, Google Search Console. We also connect to Google AdWords. Yes, for keyword ranking. There are lots of keyword ranking tools out there. We have our own API. There are lots of others, of course. Crawling, whether that's deep crawl or Botify or favorite crawler of choice, there's APIs for that. Site auditing, Google's Lighthouse API you can use for auditing your websites, page performance, page speed, and there's more besides. Majestic for link data. The list could go on and on and on. Ultimately, most modern platforms built this way are very built in a very API first or API centric way. So it allows you to see the data in the interface and often just extract that data via the API. And that's really all we're talking to is really trying to get data out of a system, distill that data, package, present that data in a way that's more intuitive for you, maybe integrating it with other data sets. And you don't need to know how to code. I mean, I've worked with engineers now for 20 plus years, building SEO software since 2009. And, I've often marveled at the great work the engineers have done just to find actually they've really just integrated with an API. And I don't know what else they've been doing all week. To David's point about being lazy or smart, maybe the right word. There's a lot you can do by building on the shoulders of giants who've already done the work for you. And really, when I'm looking to do something, I'm looking first, I want to build a new feature. Is there an API that can do this for us? So, the first thing to say is, look, you may not be used to looking at the output of APIs, whether it's XML or something more like JSON today. I mean, looking at a screen like that is not for everybody. Okay, but the good news is, that's what our API returns. If you make a keyword ranking query in Google for a keyword, we return a whole load of data. But of course, you can structure that using things like lots of tools online. If you look at the next screen, and suddenly you can make sense of that, and it comes in a much more human readable, structured way. Here you can see we've asked for a keyword, and we've got the 10 pages of Google. We've got all the detail of the results. We've got some user intent about the keywords, so you can see whether the keywords are brand oriented or navigation or research oriented, so on and so forth. You can see all the universal SERP features, etc. So this is great. You can get all the data out. And whether you end up storing that data in BigQuery and pulling it into Google Data Studio or putting it into any other database, there are lots of different ways you can do it. And it's very easy these days to get at that data, much easier than it was before. And really, the one thing I probably would say to you guys from my own experience is, obviously, Google Sheets is very easy to use. There's add-ons like import JSON into Google Sheets. There's lots of tools out there. One I found particularly helpful and really from a non-technical perspective, I managed to do quite a lot. CRM migrations, integration of billing data with customer data into Google Sheets, taking data from one API into another, is a tool called Parabola. And here's a good example on the next slide where you can effectively connect two APIs by using a drag and drop interface. It is lovely. It is great for non-technical users to use. It's as easy as going, I want to connect to an external API, putting in your API key or your username and password. You might have to set up some credentials, but normally you can, as long as you can just read the documentation on the API you're trying to connect to, you should be able to get the data in. Sometimes paginating can be a little bit tricky, but the guys at Parabola have been very helpful with me, or the guys trying to connect to their API will probably tell you how to use something like a cursor to do pagination. What's great about that is then you can drag and drop and say, I want this data and I want to join it with some other data, and then I want to send it all to Google Sheets, and it is just drag and drop. I'm living proof that it's idiot proof. So with that, I just say, don't be daunted by APIs. Look first at APIs. There's lots of API sites out there, programmable web, API directories, API. There's lots of other API directories where you can find really good resources for SEOs. Obviously, every SEO tool these days probably has got an API like us. On that point, that's probably my last slide is if you haven't tried our SERPs API, we'd love you to give it a try. There are lots out there. We recognize them. Authority Labs, GeoRanker, lots, Data for SEO. There's lots and lots of other tools, SERPs.com, etc. Advanced Web Ranking, Web SEO. I can go on. I know them all well. We've used many over the years. We've got our own. And all I'd say is if you're using the keyword ranking API, whether you use ours or anyone else, ask whether it uses a real browser to emulate users, whether it avoids the use of funny query parameters that us SEOs love to get 100 results at a go, or to try and geolocate. Because if you can geolocate through a browser using decimal lat long, you can get hyperlocal accuracy. Does it cover all the Google major SERP features? Does it give you keyword intent? Does it cover all the major search engines? And ultimately, if you use a real browser, you can tell whether it's above or below the fold, which is really interesting. And even whether results are visible. If you're looking at shopping results, sometimes they're not all visible on the page, they're in the carousel. So there's a huge amount of information that you can get out from the SERP. We'd love you to try our API, and anyone who watches the show today, I was going to say 10,000 credits, but I'm feeling generous since it's Tea Time SEO, so you can have 100,000 credits on me to give it a try. And with that, I'm going to pass you over to Sandy, who can talk to you about his experience of using some of the other great APIs out there.
Thanks, Laurence. I appreciate that. So kind of echoing Lawrence's point about APIs not being scary, and I think David's going to talk about this idea of kind of like working harder, not smarter. If you want to kind of get into this stuff and you're in SEO, the gateway drug, if you like, for want of a better word, is to start looking at the Search Console API. The great thing about the Search Console API is that it gives you a lot more granular information than you'll actually get through the interface. So for example, if you use the Search Console interface, you can only get, I think, 1,000 rows worth of data, whereas the API will give you 5,000 rows. Another thing that the API does, the interface doesn't, is it lets you combine different metrics or segments or whatever they're called. So for example, you could do things like find out a page and the keyword that it's ranking on, along with the clicks and impressions for that page. All of that is available through the API, and you can't do it through the interface. In order to be able to actually do that, to experiment with it, but not necessarily be a coder, the place to start really is the API Explorer that Google do. It's available at developers.google.com, and it lets you actually access your Search Console data through an API key, if you like, but you don't actually have to write code to do it. You can construct a query, send it to the API, get the information back, and do it all in a browser. Now, once you do that, what will happen is you'll get a response, which is a JSON object, which is kind of what Laurence showed before. And JSON, when you look at it, is kind of scary. A good tool to kind of turn a JSON object into something that can be read by Excel, a CSV, is something called conclone.io. If you search for it on Google, you'll see it. And with that, all you've got to do is cut and paste the JSON into a window in the browser, and it will automatically format it into a CSV for you, which you can then just download and put it into Excel and do what you want with it. That's if you want to kind of dip your toe into the pseudo technical side of this kind of thing. If you want it to just work, a really good plugin is for Google Sheets is the Search Analytics plugin. This will just let you put your Search Console login details in. It'll let you construct a query. It'll even let you set up a timed task, and then it'll just go off and pull it into Google Sheets for you. So it's really easy to do. That's something I've used a lot. And if we could just go to the next slide, I'll tell you about some of the things that you're able to do once you've got this data in your processing package of choice, whether that's Excel or Google Sheets, or if you scale it up a bit into a database or BigQuery or something. There's actually a lot that you can actually do with it. One of the things that I recommend that you do is actually try and categorize the data. So for example, if you have a list of URLs and they're from your blog, list them as being categorize them as being part of your blog. If they're your main transactional pages, categorize them as your main transactional pages. Once you've done that, you can segment it in pretty much any way you want. If you have, for example, the URLs and the rankings and the click-through rate from Search Console, you can kind of bucket all of those keywords and get the average by position, and then build something that you would call a click-through rate curve, which kind of looks like what I'm showing you here. It's important to say that this data is absolutely vital because it's first-party data for your website. And what this chart is showing is the click-through rate by position. And whenever you look at this, you'll always get a graph which is kind of this shape, in that position 1 is really, really high. In this case, I think it was 49%. And then it kind of drops off very, very dramatically right up until you get to page 2, where it's pretty much non-existent. if you have this data, you'll find that you're then able to benchmark your performance or use it to actually forecast traffic increases. I'll go into a bit more detail on how you would actually do this in the follow-up to this talk. That said, I believe Authoritas actually does this for you. Is that right, Laurence? Yeah. So there you go. So if you wanted to use Authoritas, it'll actually do it for you as well. But assuming that you've got this yourself, what you can then do is you can combine it with a tool like Screaming Frog, which offers access to even cooler APIs like GA and Search Console if you needed it as well, but also Page Speed Insights. Page Speed Insights is free, and that's kind of my favorite one to use, but you can also use Majestic, Href, and Moz, which are all paid for. Once you've got a list of URLs that you're interested in, you can put it into Screaming Frog list mode, and then pull all the data on a page-by-page level. And then once you've got that, going on to the next slide, you can then use that to answer a whole bunch of SEO questions. So, for example, you're able to calculate your own click-through rate curve. You'd be able to kind of work out what's the minimum title length you'll need for your pages to be on page 1. You can look at word count. You can look at in-links affecting your rankings. There's a lot of really interesting things you can do. What the diagram here is showing is we were actually this was a study we did. We were trying to work out if there's a correlation between position and any of these ranking factors for on page. And it was quite interesting because it almost showed that there's no correlation between each of these individually. What that means is that all of them interact with in quite a complicated way. So the next thing that you'd need to do is to kind of build some sort of mathematical model to get into the nuts and bolts of this. And it's really interesting. I'm not suggesting you do that just yet. Just get to grips with the APIs. And kind of going on to the very last slide for the tips I need to talk about before I hand you over to David is learn Python. Well, I say learn Python. Try and get into Python, because at the end of the day, if you do this stuff seriously, and I am also a big advocate of being lazy, but if you kind of do this stuff to a lot of detail, you are going to hit a wall with Excel. Now, obviously in SEO, Excel is kind of like our bread and butter, but it cuts off a million rows. The last data set I worked on or built was like 4.5 million rows. So if I tried to do this in Excel, my computer would have just died. But Python has some really good libraries for manipulating and analyzing data. I'm not saying use Python to access APIs. You don't really have to, but it's a good thing to do. There are a lot of free sources. So that's me, but thank you for listening. And I'm going to pass you over to David now.
Thank you, Sandy and Laurence. I think if there's one thing I want to maybe get across today, it's that you can just Google any of this stuff. Anything you want to do here, just Google it, and you'll be on your way, right? It's like learning anything else. So if you want to get data from, say, the Majestic API into Google Sheets, just Google, Majestic data to Sheets, and boom, you're probably going to be on your way. I know that because at Coding is for Losers, we literally published a Google Sheets template for the Majestic API, right? That probably will rank if you search that. So people are out there making tools for you, right? Like Authoritas and all these other tools to use the data from these APIs where you need it. So lean on the work that other people have done before you to help you get there. So, for example, all these tools listed here, Sandy mentioned Search Analytics for Sheets. There's Supermetrics for Sheets and BigQuery. My team at Coding is for Losers uses a lot of Stitch, which will allow you to pipe data from, more like analytics APIs like GA and Search Console into BigQuery or any database. But lean on the tools that are out there. Don't spend time initially, right, spinning your wheels writing a bunch of code. Let's see. And I learned that the hard way, right? Like I've spent so much time writing code that I really didn't need to write because someone else had already done it. Second tip that I'd share is focus on taking a database mindset and kind of like getting all of the data that you work on together in a consistent place that is where you work on it, right? It doesn't matter whether that's in Google Sheets. It doesn't matter whether that's in, you know, a BigQuery database or a Snowflake database or somewhere else. It's really a mindset, right? It's about owning your data, getting control of all the data that you need to do your work, and having a place where it lives, so that rather than, you know, exporting a CSV and kind of storing it somewhere and then losing it, and, you know, how did I do that again? You know, like just having a process and having a place where it lives is a mindset that you can get into outside of any of the technical aspects of how you're connecting to APIs, right? Or whether you're using a database. Even if your process is, I export a CSV from this specific place, I put it in this specific tab in this specific spreadsheet, templatizing and getting into that mindset will kind of like get you onto the engineering workflow, you know what I mean? Versus a more like scattered, I would say, data analysis process that we're all guilty of to some extent. And I think once you're in that mindset, and once you have your data together in a cohesive way, right, where you have this keyword data goes in this tab, links data goes in this tab, crawl data goes in this tab, or database table, right? Then you can get into querying it, right, and joining it together, performing some math on it. Say you wanted to do a really, you know, mini anomaly detection to say like which keywords or pages are going up and which are going down, right? A query language is how you'd do that math in one cohesive function. You can learn the Google Sheets query function, right, to do that. You can learn SQL in BigQuery using like the public GA data set. There's a lot of different ways to do that, and a ton of tutorials out there to learn SQL. But to use the gateway drug metaphor, once you learn SQL or learn how to query data in general, there's just endless application, and it's very WYSIWYG in the sense of you write a query, you get a result, right? It's the easiest form of coding to learn because it's direct, immediate feedback, right? You know exactly where you're wrong, you know exactly where you're right, and you can see once you're done what the output is. Let's see. And yeah, kind of along these lines, like at Coding is for Losers, the key thing about laziness is you can build templates for yourself and basically do work for a future version of yourself. So if part of your process is, you know, you pull down some keyword rankings data, some links data, right? Those couple examples. Having a template, whether it's in Sheets or whether that's in a database, right? We use DBT, which is getdbt.com, to kind of like build SQL analysis, templatized processes. But building a template, right, that you can use, you can pass around your team, you can publish it, right, in a blog post, you can sell it to people. This has been more or less our entire business, right, is making these bite-sized, repeatable analysis templates. And there's a ton of different ways to publish these, right, even if you're just using, sharing these internally. And let's see. Yeah, that's all I got.
Thank you very much, Sandy, David, and Lawrence, for all those insightful tips. I'm going to pass over to Carrie as we have some questions from the audience.
Great, thank you. I'm going to start off with a question for Sandy. Let me just find it. How many URLs did you analyze? It's interesting to hear that you did not see any major changes for amending the H1 tag, title tag, and word count, and meta descriptions individually. It seems to take all the changes into account.
So that was for a study we were doing at Purplex to try and understand trends within a very specific vertical. I looked at I think it's about 200 websites for about 6 months, and got 4.5 million rows worth of data by about 70 columns. I mean, it's not to say that there isn't a correlation, but you've got to understand that there's 70 different things in a very complicated way interacting to drive those ranking changes. And with that kind of correlation, you wouldn't really see it. You'd have to build some sort of model to try and understand what each different thing is contributing towards the change in rankings you would see. Analyzing search ranking data is more complicated than I thought, if I'm honest, because the order of the data matters, which kind of complicates things. I will be following up on that because I'm kind of right at the beginning of my analysis there. So watch this space.
That's great. That sounds really interesting. Thank you. Laurence, I have a question for you from Sophie. Do all APIs output in JSON?
I'm sure I'm the best person to ask that, but my answer would be no. I've certainly used APIs that output in JSON and in XML. I mean, you might even get a CSV back from some APIs, but most I haven't used any myself. But most APIs, I think, would be either JSON or XML. I don't know whether David or Sandy have anything else to add to that.
Yeah, SEMrush is CSV, but most others will be JSON.
Yeah, I was just going to say all the APIs I've ever used have been JSON, but I guess, as you say.
Great, thank you. And David, I have a question for you. To learn SQL, where would you recommend to learn this?
We have a blog post up on Coding is for Losers, which is, I think, learn-BigQuery-SQL. That's a helpful one to get started. But if you're looking to learn a different flavor of SQL, right, like maybe Snowflake or just MySQL, I would say just look around there's tons of different tutorials online. Anything ranking within the first couple pages, I would say. It's a really deep catalog of public tutorials.
Great, thank you. Well, I think that's all the questions we have time for today. So I'll hand back over to Joe. Thank you guys.
I've got one question actually. If
okay.
Before you do that, maybe with David, with your experience of BigQuery, but Sandy, please jump in if you've got anything to add. It's just often we tend to export data directly from our clients for keyword ranking data, huge volumes of data and competitors, ranking URLs, ranks over time into BigQuery. We looked at ourselves at doing a Google Data Studio connector. But it was kind of like some other SEO platforms have, and you get kind of a basic sort of summary data of almost normalized data of rankings, etc. I just wonder what if you were to explain to a non-technical SEO what the advantages of BigQuery might be over Google Sheets or just a basic Google Data Studio connector, whether you'd what would you say to someone who's considering options?
Yeah, I would say it's purely, sorry, I have to charge my computer here. It's purely a processing power, So if you get data into Google BigQuery, then you can perform math on millions and millions of rows of data, which you may well have, right? If you have historical keyword rankings for, say, you're an agency, right? You're working on 10, 20, 30 different sites, all the historical keywords for all of those sites. That can add up very quickly in terms of data size. So if you want to perform a consistent analysis on your data set as a whole across, say, your entire agency, the only game in town to do that is going to be databases rather than spreadsheets, rather than any BI tool like Data Studio that just won't have the processing power to do it. So we really favor do the math in a database, and then you can have your reporting be extremely simple and load extremely quickly because the math has been done for you right before you're at the moment of visualization.
Yeah, perfect. So it's a sort of a database versus spreadsheets argument, effectively. Mm-hmm. Okay. Just lastly, David, looking at your site, you have a sort of I can't remember call it like a template vault, or you've got some great little things on there like your website content audit and things like that. Just if clients want to find out more about literally what they can do themselves, where's the best place to visit on your site? Is it to go to CIFL CIFL or somewhere else?
Yeah, I think there's an SEO APIs blog post that has a starter template in it that includes Sheets API integrations for a number of SEO APIs. So I think that's codingisforlosers.com/SEO-APIs. That's a good place to start.
Perfect. Thanks very much.
Yep.
Okay, back to Joe then.
Thank you very much. So we have quite a few questions that have come through about APIs. It's not scary. So if you have any questions, do drop a line down to Sandy, David, and Laurence, and you can find out more about how you can start using an API, perhaps your goal in 2021. And that leads me for the next and our last Tea Time SEO for next Thursday. And we'll be doing a Tea Time Christmas jumper special. Hope everyone's got their Christmas jumper. I know Carrie's got hers on. Sandy's got you've got one on. So Laurence, hopefully you'll have yours as well for next week.
I think I might have thrown mine away actually. But,
these are very warm, so I might take this off in a minute. But we're going to have 4 people join us, 4 great speakers join us about talking all about what campaigns they did, or what outreach they did, or what events that they did in 2020, and then based on that, what they're going to do in 2021. So we have Alina, Mark, Mike, and Marit joining us next week for a Christmas jumper special for 2020. So a big thank you very much for David for joining us all the way from Austin, Texas, Sandy from Bristol, UK, Laurence from Twickers in the UK, and Carrie and myself from Barcelona and Putney. And we look forward to seeing you all next Thursday for our last Tea Time SEO of 2020, where you can learn about what campaigns, what link outreach, what SEO activity worked well in 2020, and what you can do for next year. Make 2021 a really, really good year. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, everyone.
thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.